Tonight we begin our coverage with a story that could have far-reaching consequences for law enforcement, the legal system, and communities across the country. The nation's highest court, the United States Supreme Court, has handed down a major decision that is already making waves in legal circles and beyond. In a rare show of complete agreement, the Supreme Court has issued a unanimous decision that will fundamentally reshape how courts across America judge cases involving police use of force. The case at the center of this landmark ruling is Barnes versus Felix. In this case, all 9 justices came together to set a new, clearer standard for evaluating the actions of police officers during confrontations. This historic ruling settles years of disagreement and confusion among lower courts, finally creating a single, unified rule that will apply to every court in the country, from coast to coast. Justice Elena Kagan, writing for the court, emphasized that judges must now consider the full context of police encounters, not just the final, most dramatic moments, but everything that led up to them. This means that, moving forward, judges are required to look at the entire series of events leading up to the use of force, examining every relevant detail and circumstance, rather than focusing narrowly on a single instant. Legal experts say this shift is expected to dramatically change how lawsuits against police officers are argued and decided, potentially affecting thousands of cases each year and altering the strategies of both plaintiffs and defense attorneys. The Supreme Court's message is clear. Context matters. Every part of an officer's conduct, from the first moment of an encounter to the last, is now relevant in determining what is reasonable under the law. For families seeking justice, for police departments reviewing their policies, and for communities hoping for greater accountability, this ruling sets a new national benchmark. It redefines what is considered reasonable, and it will shape the future of policing and civil rights litigation in America. The case began with a tragic traffic stop that would have far-reaching consequences. It unfolded in the bustling city of Houston, Texas back in 2016, a year marked by several high-profile incidents involving law enforcement. Ashton Barnes was pulled over by Officer Robert Felix Jr. for what seemed like minor toll violations, a routine stop that many drivers experience daily. However, what started as a routine stop quickly escalated into a tense confrontation, ultimately ending with Officer Felix fatally shooting Barnes, a moment that would change lives forever. Barnes's mother, devastated by the loss of her son, took legal action, suing the officer. She argued that Felix used excessive force and violated her son's constitutional rights, seeking justice for her family. Lower courts, however, sided with the officer, focusing narrowly on the final seconds before the shooting, a decision that left many questioning the fairness of the judicial process. They ruled that Felix's belief he was in imminent danger justified his actions at that critical moment, a ruling that sparked debate about police accountability. But Barnes's family argued passionately that the officer's earlier decisions, such as escalating the situation unnecessarily, should also be considered in the court's evaluation. The central question emerged: should courts consider the entire sequence of events leading up to the shooting, or focus solely on the last moments? This question would challenge legal precedents. The Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, setting the stage for a potentially landmark ruling that could redefine how such cases are judged in the future, impacting both law enforcement and civil rights. Before this landmark ruling, many courts across the country relied on what was known as the moment of the threat doctrine. This legal principle meant that when evaluating whether a police officer's use of force was justified, judges and juries would focus solely on the precise instant when the officer claimed to feel threatened. In practice, this meant that the officer's split-second perception of danger was the only thing that mattered, regardless of what led up to that moment. The law essentially asked, was the officer afraid for their safety right then and there? But this approach had a major flaw. It ignored everything that happened before the critical moment, such as the officer's decisions, words, and actions that may have escalated the situation. By focusing only on the final seconds, courts often missed crucial context that could explain why the encounter turned dangerous in the first place. Recognizing this problem, the Supreme Court unanimously rejected this narrow and incomplete view of police encounters. Writing for the court, Justice Kagan explained that the Fourth Amendment demands a broader, more thorough analysis. It's not enough to look at a single snapshot in time. The law requires examining the entire sequence of events. The court emphasized that focusing only on the final seconds of an encounter gives an incomplete and often misleading picture of what really happened. Important details and context can be lost if we ignore the lead-up to the use of force. Now, courts must consider whether an officer's own conduct or decisions contributed to creating the danger that led to the use of force. This means looking at whether the officer escalated the situation unnecessarily or failed to use de-escalation tactics. With this ruling, the Supreme Court has eliminated the moment of the threat doctrine nationwide, setting a new standard for evaluating police actions. Judges and juries are now required to review the entire police encounter, from the very beginning to the very end, considering every relevant detail and decision along the way. This important change aims to ensure that decisions in police use of force cases are fairer, more accurate, and truly reflect the full reality of each situation, not just a single, isolated moment. All 9 justices agreed to overturn the lower court's decision in Barnes v. Felix. This rare unanimity sends a powerful message. The law demands a full review of police use of force incidents. Justice Kagan's opinion called the old doctrine flawed and incorrect. The case now returns to the lower courts, which must apply the new, broader standard. Even justices focused on police safety agreed that context matters. The Supreme Court's clear guidance now sets the standard for every court in the country. The Supreme Court reinforced that the right standard is totality of the circumstances. Courts must now consider all relevant facts and actions, from the beginning to the end of an encounter. This means looking at whether officers followed proper procedures or escalated situations unnecessarily. The goal: determine if force was objectively reasonable based on the whole story. For example, if an officer chases someone into a dead end, that decision is now part of the analysis. The final moments are no longer the only focus. Every decision counts. This approach ensures a more complete and fair evaluation of police conduct. This decision is expected to increase police accountability nationwide. By requiring courts to review the whole incident, it may be easier to hold officers responsible for reckless decisions. The ruling strengthens Fourth Amendment protections for everyone. Civil rights groups have praised the decision as a step toward more responsible policing. Law enforcement agencies are now encouraged to improve training and focus on de-escalation. Officers know their actions throughout an encounter will be scrutinized, not just the end. This could lead to safer interactions and more trust between police and communities. The ruling calls for thoughtful, constitutional policing at every stage. Although the Supreme Court set a new standard, the legal journey for Barnes's family isn't over. The case returns to lower courts, which must now review all the facts under the new rule. A major hurdle remains: qualified immunity, which can shield officers from lawsuits unless they violate clearly established rights. The Supreme Court didn't address qualified immunity in this decision. So, while the standard for judging police actions is clearer, holding officers financially responsible remains complex. The national debate over qualified immunity continues in Congress and the courts. The Supreme Court's ruling is a major step, but the conversation about justice and accountability is far from finished.